You know, one of the cute and adorable things that you will notice about Crystal and I, if you have the privilege of hanging out with us for very long, is that we like to and we enjoy, and have for quite a while, probably since we were dating, we enjoy betting on really stupid stuff. And when I say really stupid things, I mean like, hey, what's the name of that actor on that TV show? Oh, no, that's not. Well, yeah, it is. Or, how many quarters can you fit up your left nostril? It's 4, by the way. It's pretty impressive. And there are those really rare occasions where Crystal somehow is able to, beyond the shadow of a doubt, convince me that I am wrong. Now, these don't happen very often, and if you know the men in the Robinson family, it's just kind of the way it is. We don't like to admit when we're wrong. My sister got that quality as well, if you know her at all. Yeah. Praying for you, Ty. It does happen from time to time where we are backed into a corner to a place where we have no other option but to admit that we are wrong. And for me, one of those moments, again, very rare, happened on Friday. We were taking the boys to their last swim lesson at the Turner Pool, where I took swim lessons. And we're all getting in the car, and of course, with the boys, it's like a last minute thing, and it's like get all your stuff and grab your towel and whatever. So I'm the last guy out the door, and I've got the keys to the van, and Crystal says, "Hey, don't forget to lock the door," which I never lock the door. I never lock the door. I couldn't care less. It's fine. But because I'm an amazing husband, I say, okay, I will lock the door. And so I put the key in, and it doesn't work. So I put the other key in, and I go through 5 of these keys, and I'm like, none of these stupid things work. This is ridiculous. I'm not locking the door. So I get in the van, and we go, and the boys do their thing, and we get back from swim practice, and I walk right in the front door, and Crystal notices he didn't unlock the front door, which means he didn't lock the front door. And so it was one of those, she saw her opportunity, and she was like, you didn't lock the front door. And I said, no, I didn't lock the front door because none of your stupid keys work. And she's like, yeah, it's the one that says Lowe's on the key. And I said, well, they all say Lowe's. All 5 of these things say Lowe's. And she said, want to bet? And whenever she initiates the bet, usually it's me, whenever she initiates the bet, it is a really good chance that she's right. But I had just seen these keys. I had just looked through all of these dumb keys. None of them worked, and all of them said Lowe's. So I said, yeah, absolutely, I will bet you. And so what I did is I handed the keys to Wyatt so that he could read for both of us. Because I found that the more people you get involved in a bet, the better it is, right? And so I was very much ready for Wyatt to read Lowe's, 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 Lowe's. And then when I got done with my victory lap and had gone and gotten congratulations from all the neighbors and written up the editorial piece for the Statesman Journal, I was going to be ready to receive her apology. And so Wyatt, he grabs the keys, and the first one, Lowe's, Larry's, and I realized I had seen the L, and I was wrong. And I had to admit that I was wrong. And thankfully it was, one of those really stupid bets that didn't really mean anything, but I was wrong. And so congratulations. I hope your next win next year will be just as sweet as this one. But every once in a while, I have to admit to myself or someone else that I'm wrong. Do you enjoy that as much as I do? I just don't enjoy that. And thankfully, it doesn't happen all too often. I mean, no more than once a week. But I just hate being told that I'm wrong and then having to admit when I'm wrong. And this evening, we are going to spend some time with the Apostle Paul. And I believe that he has some just a golden nugget of wisdom that is kind of lost in Scripture. But we're gonna flesh this out a little bit tonight as we continue our walk through the letter to the Galatians. So if you'll open up your Bible or your smartphone or whatever you've got, we're going to be in Galatians chapter 2. And this, we're going to be in the first, few verses. And what's happened is Paul, who was raised a Jew, he was raised a Pharisee. He was a Pharisee among Pharisees. And what that means is that his dad was a Pharisee. He was raised by a man who took seriously the law of Moses. The Torah, not just the 10 Commandments, but the traditions and the 613 other laws that had been passed down generation after generation after generation. And they took those very, very seriously. And Paul had been raised to believe that the way that you please God is by keeping the law and doing that diligently. And so what he had done is he had given his entire life, not just to following the law himself, but to teaching it to other peoples and to really literally fighting for it, violently when necessary. As he went on in life, he found in this moment, as he was on his way to the city of Damascus, he's walking along this road, and he ends up coming across the risen Christ. There's this moment where Jesus meets him on the road, and everything that he had been taught to believe, everything that he had spent his entire life believing and working towards and fighting for, came crashing down in an instant. And for Paul, this was a really difficult moment. This was a moment when he had to realize that he had been wrong. And it wasn't just wrong about something that was trivial and dumb that he got to banter back and forth with his wife about. This was something that he had based his entire existence upon. It was something that he had spent years and years working to stamp out this new upstart heresy, Christianity, these little Christs that were running around following this Jesus character who he knew beyond a shadow of a doubt to be a heretic. And so Paul, this man that had done everything possible to eradicate the memory of Jesus, found himself face to face with Jesus, who he then knew in an instant was this God that he had been trying desperately to please, only to find out that he had been an adversary of that God, that he had been diligently working against what God had been trying to do in the world. And not just working against it, he had been dividing it, he had been tearing it apart, and he had been destroying what God was trying to build. And it crushed him. And so what he did is he spent the next several years traveling around and investigating and interviewing every person that he could get a hold of, who had known Jesus, who had seen Jesus, who had been there when Jesus had done these things, trying to figure out what Jesus did, what Jesus said, who Jesus was, what was he teaching, what was he about, what did I miss, and how did I miss it? And then he began to travel the known world, this gigantic Roman empire of which he was a citizen. He changed everything about himself, a complete 180, and he began to spread this gospel of Jesus that he had once been trying to stamp out. He now was the tip of this spear, and he traveled around the world, and he was planting churches in every little town that he came to. And he got to know these people in this province called Galatia that was that had been taken over by the Celts and the Gauls about 250 years before, and these people were not Jewish. And so as Paul walked into this town, he met these people that didn't know the 613 laws. They didn't know who Moses was. They didn't know anything about the traditions of Judaism, but that wasn't a hurdle that kept Paul from teaching to them. That was his ministry. God had called him to go into the nations who didn't know who Yahweh was and to teach them about Jesus and about this love and this sacrifice and the freedom that comes from Christ. And so as he was doing this and planting all these churches, like I told you last week, he would begin to hear rumor of what was happening after he had left. And these people came behind, and they seemed to be following him in all these little churches. And they were adding to this gospel that he had given to them, where it was Jesus alone and faith in this Christ that would save you. These people came along behind and begin to subvert that and add things to the gospel. And it wasn't just Jesus, it was Jesus and the law. It was Jesus and Torah, and it was Jesus and circumcision. And you had to follow all of Judaism and Jesus. And Paul was just absolutely enraged by this. And what we see Paul do in chapter 2 is something that I think that we need to build into our lives. It's something that I was taught years ago as I entered ministry, that you have to do this or you will fail. Will you stand with me as we read from Galatians chapter 2, verse 1 and 2? Hear from the words of Paul to the Galatians. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem, this time with Barnabas. I took Titus along as well. I went in response to a revelation, and meeting privately with those esteemed as leaders, I presented to them the gospel that I was preaching among the Gentiles. I wanted to be sure I was not running and had not been running my race in vain. You take a seat. So at this point, Paul is writing this letter to the Galatians, letting them know what he had done. What he had done is 14 years after this divine appointment with Jesus on the road to Damascus, where he met the living Christ, this Jesus that had been resurrected, who was in himself God. He met him and everything changed. Nothing in his life was as it was. He didn't talk the same. He didn't live the same. He didn't follow the same rules. You would not recognize this guy 14 years later if you knew him when he was a Jew. And so he writes the Galatians and he tells them, here's what I did. I went up to Jerusalem seeking wisdom. Paul went trying to find someone who would speak brutal, honest truth to him. He had been wrong once. He had been working against God and not knowing it, and nobody told him. And it took an act of God to change his mind and redirect his life. And he wanted to make sure that that was never, ever going to happen again. He could not bear the thought that he had spent all of this time and all of this energy getting to know this Jesus and then preaching this gospel to all of these people that didn't know who God was. And he couldn't bear the thought that he was doing it wrong. And so what he did is he went down to Jerusalem. And he climbed the hill and he met with those who knew Jesus best. And he sought their counsel and he sought their wisdom. And he gave them authority to tell him that he was wrong. And I want to spend a little bit of time tonight breaking down exactly what this looks like. And what you'll see all over, not only in Scripture, but in secular business world. Leaders who have people around them who are able to tell them when they're wrong, to correct them when they are off on the wrong path, to bring them back home where they should be. Accountability. So here's what Paul does. Paul spends time praying and listening to God. You'll notice that what he says here, hey, I went up to Jerusalem and I took Barnabas and Titus as well, and I went in response to a revelation. Paul had been praying about this. Paul had been seeking God about this very fact, this gospel that he was preaching. Am I doing this well? Am I doing this right? I want to make sure that what I'm doing right now is not something that I'm going to end up regretting later. That's going to send not only myself, but other people off on this distant path that is not the path to truth. And so Paul had been praying and seeking God's wisdom. And God's response to him was, go talk to those that knew me best. Go to Jerusalem. And so we did. He did. He didn't fall into the trap that many of us, myself included, so often fall into, where we end up running so fast, so hard, and spending all of our time with our head down and just barreling forward and not actually looking at where we're going and asking if what we're doing is what we should be doing. You guys remember that amazing, life-changing movie, Jurassic Park? I love that movie. There's that scene with Dr. Ian Malcolm, right? And he's been mangled by the T-Rex, and they're sitting down in the bunker, and he says to John Hammond, he says, you were so preoccupied with the idea of if you could, that you didn't stop to ask if you should. You were doing everything possible because you could do it. You didn't ask if you should do it. And this is what Paul was doing. Paul paused and he said, is this what I should be doing? And if it's not, who will I allow to tell me that I'm wrong? He received revelation from God. God answered his prayer and gave him direction. These are the guys you need to go talk to. And they're going to speak wisdom, and they're going to speak truth, and you're going to listen. And so Paul went. Paul went to these guys. He didn't wait for them to come to him. He didn't wait for word to get out that he was doing something wrong. He didn't wait for all the rumors to start flying and people to start talking behind his back. He took action and initiative. And it was important enough for him to know that he was doing what God wanted him to do, that he sought these guys out. And he went and he had a conversation with them. He didn't go looking for those people who would just tickle his ears and tell him what he wanted to hear. Oftentimes I find myself needing advice, and I'm always tempted to go to those people who I know are going to tell me exactly what I want to hear. And we all have those people in our lives. And usually it's the people that love us so much that it's hard for them to see where we're failing. But Paul didn't go to those people. Paul went to the people that he knew that he could trust to tell him unfiltered truth. And so he took action, and he went to Jerusalem. And he humbled himself before these guys. Paul went in asking the right questions. Am I doing this right? Is this what you believe God is having me do? Does this line up with Scripture? Does this line up with what you know of Jesus? Here's what I've been telling people. This is the gospel that I've been preaching all over the known world. Am I doing this right? How often do you go to someone and say, how am I doing, honestly? Am I doing things right? Am I presenting myself well? How am I perceived by everyone? Do you have anybody in the office where you work that you can go to and ask that question? Is there someone who knows you and your family well enough that you could go to them and say, I need you to be honest. Am I doing okay? How am I doing as a parent? How am I doing as a spouse? How am I doing as a believer? Am I representing the gospel well? Do you have someone that can speak into your life like that? And if you do, are you able to humble yourself and actually hear that and take that in and own it and redirect yourself if you need to? Those are fun questions, right? Here's the other thing that Paul did. He went and he talked to these guys in private, and he talked to them in person. Paul is known in Christianity and in history, really, of writing letters. That's all we have of Paul, is all of these letters that he wrote to all of these churches, these people that he loved and spent time with, and he wrote letter after letter after letter, and they weren't cheap. They were very expensive to send. But he sent a lot of them. And we know Paul by what he writes in his letters. But in this instant, it was apparently important enough for him that a letter wouldn't do. And so he stopped what he was doing. He stopped the mission that he was on. He reversed course and he went to Jerusalem. And this likely took days and days, if not weeks, of travel. It probably cost him a lot of money. It obviously cost him a ton of time and energy. He wasn't getting any younger. And he travels all the way to Jerusalem to sit down in private, face to face with these guys. And he says, hey, here's what I'm doing. This is the gospel that I'm preaching. Let me be honest and transparent with you about what's really going on and what I'm giving my life to and how I'm spending my time. Let me tell you exactly what's happening. And these men listened to him, and then they spoke. I don't know about you, but in this day of instant communication, of quick responses and reactions that are measured in characters, but not character. In moments when you can get a hold of literally almost anyone on the planet in less than a second, I am finding the incredible value of sitting down face to face with someone and having a conversation and hearing them speak and trying to understand their heart and where they're coming from and then having a deep conversation with them. Anybody else noticing how valuable that is these days? That are quick reactions and it just doesn't work the same. And so Paul, instead of sending this letter, he goes to these guys and he sits down in private and they have a long conversation and they hear each other's hearts. And then Paul listened to what these guys had to say. After convening together and eating together, I would imagine, because that's just kind of a Hebrew thing to do, and talking long into the night, they came to an agreement. They heard what Paul was doing. They heard the passion and the heart that God had given him for the Gentiles, for those that didn't grow up in this Jewish tradition, who didn't have the baseline of knowing who God was, that God had called him to a totally different group of people that really were difficult for all of these guys back in Jerusalem to connect with, that they did not feel called to at all. They recognized that God had called Paul to do something that they weren't called for. And what they did is they saw that in him, they recognized it, and they blessed him to go and to do what he was doing. Thank the Lord, this was not a moment when Paul was wrong. He did everything possible, everything perfectly right that you would want to do to make sure that what you're doing is right. He went and held himself accountable to other people to make sure that the gospel that he was giving, the way that he was living his life, this passion and mission and vision that he believed God had given him, was actually from God. And that's an impressive thing. I don't know too many people in the world who allow themselves that kind of accountability. I've known several in my life, and I can tell you those who have it, those who make this an absolute priority in their life, they're just different people. They're people that are more humble, and they're almost always kinder. They're people that will give you time, and they will sit down with you, and they're much less quick to judge and to jump to conclusions and to react and go off the hook. These are people that that humble themselves before others. And so here's what I want to end this with tonight, Oasis. This idea of accountability, this idea of going to someone and saying, I know you, I trust you, I've seen the way that you live, and I know that you're a godly person, and I want to come under you and allow you to speak into my life, to dig into some of the spots that might not be too comfortable. And I want you to be able to have the authority to tell me when I'm wrong, to sit me down and say, you know what? I watched what you did the other day. That wasn't okay. To humble yourself enough before a person who has earned your trust and proven to be of godly wisdom is a beautiful thing. And let me tell you, Oasis, this is critical to the Christian life. Because what so often happens is that, at least for me, I get distracted by so many different things that seem to be so important that I slowly begin to veer off course from what God has called me to do and what all of Christianity has been focused on for 2,000 years. And the gospel ends up slowly sliding to the back burner. And what I've done over the years, at the advice and wisdom of several men in my life, is I have a couple of people. I've got a couple of people in my life who I have given authority to speak truth into my life, who are able to ask me those questions about my marriage, about parenting, about my personal habits, how I spend my time and my money. And they're people that have earned my trust. They're people that I have watched for years and I know are godly men. And I have put them in a position of authority and power over me, to speak to me when I am in the wrong, and to encourage me when I am doing things that are really hard but have to be done. I've got one of my best friends is a pastor, and he lives in Albany, and Brian and I talk almost every day. And we have given each other authority to speak truth and to call each other out when we see sin, to talk to the other guy's wife if needed, to make sure everything's going well. I've got a couple of guys here at Oasis that I have given authority to, that I've known long enough and watched long enough that they can call me out and tell me when I'm being an idiot. I had coffee with Keith this last week, and he's been one of those guys for me, who's able to sit me down and say, that was really dumb. What were you doing? Are you sure that's a movie you want to go watch? The answer was no, it wasn't a movie that I wanted to go watch. This is something in the Christian life that if you don't take seriously, you will end up so far off course because we have an enemy that is very real and not messing around. And if you look back over the last 30 to 40 years at Christian leadership, you can see where people go off stray. You can see when they begin to fail. And almost every time, it is because there is no one in their life that can tell them that they're wrong. And they hold all power and authority for themselves to themselves. And we can't do that. That is unbelievably dangerous. Every time I've ever spoken with someone who's had an affair, every time I've ever spoken to someone who's lost a job because of dereliction of duty, it is always because they had no one in their lives who was able to know what was actually going on and then tell them that they were being an idiot. And so what I want to do tonight always is I want to make sure that we take this seriously, that we hear and see what Paul had in his life. This system where he was able to go to people that he knew and trust, who were godly examples of what it was like to follow Jesus, who could speak that deep, hard, unfiltered truth into their lives. And if you don't have that, let me just tell you, A, you've got to have that. And B, yeah, those conversations are really, really hard. And they are difficult and they can be painful, but they are absolutely worth it. You can look back over history. All great leaders who end up failing and falling don't have this in place. Accountability is absolutely critical to all forms of leadership, especially for us believers. The church board, they have the ability to speak into my life. They get to see what's going on at church and how I'm leading and where I'm leading. And they get to ask me questions. Why? What was that about? What are you planning to do here? And they have the authority to speak in and to tell me when I'm wrong. We have a denomination that is global and does the exact same thing. I have a wife who knows what's going on in my life, and she can tell when things aren't going really well. And she can speak into my life and say, you know what? You need to take a break, or you need to get off your butt and start moving. Usually it's take a break. Oasis, this is a incredible blessing that God has given us through the church. To be in community with people that are like-minded, who have the exact same beliefs when it comes to those things that are absolutely critical, and who want you to succeed. This is a beautiful, beautiful thing, and this is what church looks like. It's not all worship songs and family camp. Sometimes it's hard conversations. And sometimes it means going over to somebody's house and sitting down. And sometimes it means going to coffee and saying, I'm a little worried. I'm seeing some things that I'm concerned about. And then being able to humble yourself and say, yeah, you know what, you're right. Here's what's actually going on. This is one of the aspects of the church that in all the churches that I've been a part of just has not been there. Because it's so much easier to put on the church mask and walk through the doors and, hey, everything's great, and then as soon as you leave, you can go back to doing whatever you were doing and nobody's going to be the wiser, as long as you don't post it on Facebook. But that's going to get you in deep, deep trouble. And we'll be there to pull you out, but you don't have to get there in the first place. But what that takes is humility. It takes proactive action on your part. Before things start going south, you say, hey, I need to talk. You find someone who's worthy of that trust, who has shown you that they can walk with God and they speak wisdom and they can hold a secret if it's needed. Finding these people is critical to your Christian walk because you can't do this alone and you can't fake it for very long. The band's going to come back up and we're going to close tonight with one final song, and we have communion to take together. And one of the beautiful things about the table, this ancient tradition that goes back thousands of years, is that we live in community. This is not done one lone wolf at a time. This is done together. Because there are things that happen in life where you just can't do it alone. And that's what we're here for. So here's a couple of questions that I want to leave you with before we take communion. Who has the authority in your life to tell you that you're wrong? Who is that? Can you think of someone off the top of your head who has the ability to come to you and say, I'm noticing something that concerns me, and you need to change it? Do you have someone like that in your life? Do you have somebody that you go to for guidance? Godly wisdom? Who's earned your trust and has the right to have hard conversations with you? Who is that person? Preferably more than one. If you don't have people like that, what are you doing right now? What is your plan to get to that point? You need that in your life. I need that in my life. And if you don't have it, you need to have a plan. Otherwise, it's going to be another year, 2 years, and you're going to look back and think, yeah, that would have been nice to at least have somebody help dig me out of this hole. If you don't have someone in your life like that, come talk to me. Come talk to the prayer team. Find someone that you know, that you've watched, that you trust, who has godly wisdom, and begin to build that relationship. I know for the introverts, that is just terrifying. I was going to say I get that, but I really don't. But it's worth it. It's worth it. It is worth it. And here's my last question to you. How often do you seek accountability? It's one thing to have that person just in case, worst case scenario, but are you like Paul being proactive and going to them and saying, how am I doing? Open book. How am I doing? How can I improve? What do I need to change? Where am I sinning? You need to be praying that prayer to God. You need to be asking God to seek in you that which needs to be changed. But you also have to be doing that with other people. You need to do this regularly, and you need to do it with somebody that you deeply trust who's earned that in your life. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to sing a final song. And while we're singing, you're welcome to come and take elements. We have a gluten-free option, which is great, very Northwest. It's the little one right in front of the cross. But while you sing and come to grab the elements, you can come down the front and then go back out the sides. As you take these elements and go back to your seat, I want you to spend some time in prayer. And I want you to ask God to search your heart and show you those areas that need to be changed, show you where you're wrong. And then ask God to help find you that person that you can give authority to, that you can humble yourself to and say, help me. Tell me when I'm wrong. Speak truth into my life. Those are the two things I want you to focus on tonight while we sing this final song, and then we'll come back and take the elements together after this final song.